August 7th, 1944, near the town of Avranches, Normandy. The morning air is thick with the smell of burned fuel and wet earth as Hauptmann Karl-Heinz Bauer, commander of a battered Panzer IV, peers through his binoculars from the edge of a hedgerow-lined road. Somewhere ahead, American forces have pulled back in a hurry. You can hear it before you see it, the distant growl of engines, the metallic clatter of loose equipment abandoned in haste, canvas flapping in the wind. Bauer's tank lurches forward, its tracks grinding over debris left behind by a retreat that has turned chaotic. Just weeks earlier, this same ground shook under Allied artillery and fighter-bomber strikes. Now it lies eerily quiet. Bauer wipes dust from his eyes and signals his driver forward. The German retreat from Normandy has become a desperate race eastward, but orders are clear. Probe abandoned enemy positions, seize what you can, deny the Americans their supplies if possible. As the Panzer column rounds a bend, the scene opens like something unreal. Before them stretches a vast clearing, once carefully camouflaged beneath trees and netting, now torn open by movement and neglect. Rows upon rows of fuel drums glint faintly in the sunlight. Trucks, GMC Deuce and a Halfs, sit idling, some still loaded, others hastily abandoned with doors flung open. Crates are stacked higher than a man. Ammunition, spare parts, rations, medical supplies. Bauer's radio operator lets out a low whistle, forgetting for a moment where he is. Bauer orders the tank to halt. He dismounts, boots crunching on gravel and spilled cartridges. An American depot. Intact. Enormous. The kind of target German logistics officers had dreamed of destroying for years, but rarely found in this condition. Bauer walks slowly, almost cautiously, as if afraid the vision might dissolve. He lifts the lid of a crate. Brand new .50 caliber ammunition belts, still wrapped in waxed paper. Nearby, jerry cans, thousands of them, filled with high-octane fuel, the lifeblood of modern war. A Feldwebel approaches, eyes wide. "Herr Hauptmann," he says quietly, "there is more, much more beyond the trees." Bauer climbs a small rise and freezes. The depot extends farther than he can see, fields of supplies feeding an army that seems inexhaustible. For a moment, the war sounds fade. No artillery, no aircraft, just the wind moving through canvas and leaves. Bauer thinks of his own fuel situation. Tanks rationed to a few kilometers a day, engines shut down whenever possible to conserve precious drops. He thinks of trains destroyed by Allied bombers, of replacement parts that never arrive, of orders to fight without fuel, without air cover, without hope of resupply. Around him, German soldiers begin laughing, short, incredulous bursts, the kind that come when reality becomes absurd. They have captured more fuel here than their entire battalion has seen in months. Bauer knows they will destroy what they cannot carry. He knows higher command will praise the find. But as he stands amid the endless American supplies, a heavy realization begins to form, one that has nothing to do with tactics or today's orders, and everything to do with the scale of the war itself. Bauer removes his gloves and runs a bare hand along the cold steel of an American fuel drum, stenciled with neat white lettering and dates that tell a silent story of factories far across the ocean. He calls over his platoon leaders, their faces streaked with grime, eyes hollow from weeks of retreat and constant air attack. Together they walk deeper into the depot. Every few steps reveals another category of plenty. Replacement tank tracks stacked like firewood, crates of boots in every size, radios still sealed, spare engines wrapped in grease-soaked paper. An Unteroffizier pries open a ration box and stares at tins of meat, chocolate bars, coffee, real coffee, not ersatz. "They feed an army like this every day?" he mutters. Bauer doesn't answer. He's doing the math in his head, not as a tactician, but as a man who once studied engineering before the war. Each crate represents hours of labor, tons of steel, shipping lanes protected across thousands of kilometers. Each drum of fuel represents refineries untouched by bombing, pipelines unbroken, ports functioning at a scale Germany can no longer imagine. The radio crackles. Division headquarters demanding a report. Bauer describes the find, struggling to keep his voice steady. There is a pause on the line, then a clipped order. Destroy what you cannot remove. Salvage fuel immediately. Prepare to withdraw before Allied aircraft return. Bauer acknowledges, but his attention drifts. He watches his men siphon fuel into every container they can find, laughing now with a manic edge. Trucks are started, some driven by Germans for the first time, unfamiliar with automatic transmissions, but delighted by engines that roar to life without coaxing. A young loader asks Bauer if this means they can finally go on the offensive again. Bauer looks at the horizon, where distant columns of smoke mark the path of the Allied advance. No, he says quietly. It means they won't even notice this is gone. The words surprise even him. As demolition charges are set, Bauer studies the American organization of the depot. The labeled lanes, the redundant stacks, the deliberate spacing to reduce loss if bombed. This isn't improvisation. This is a system refined by repetition and excess capacity. He thinks back to the early days of the war, when German columns raced across France in 1940, living off captured fuel, believing speed and daring could replace depth. Now the roles are reversed, but the scale is different. The Americans have built a machine that assumes losses and absorbs them without pause. When the charges detonate, fire rolls across the clearing, black smoke rising like a signal visible for kilometers. Fuel drums explode in sequence, a thunderous chain reaction. Bauer watches the inferno with a strange calm. Destroying this depot feels symbolic rather than strategic. As the column pulls away, engines newly fueled, Bauer glances back one last time. He imagines hundreds of similar depots stretching behind the American lines, feeding divisions that will be replenished tomorrow and the day after and the day after that. Somewhere deep inside, the realization hardens. This war is no longer about winning battles. It's about whether you can outproduce, outmove, and outlast an enemy who seems to manufacture victory by the ton. And Germany, he knows now, cannot. That night, the Panzer column halts in a sunken lane east of the depot, engines ticking as they cool. Bauer sits on the turret of his tank, helmet beside him, staring at a map illuminated by a shaded flashlight. The paper is creased, annotated, increasingly meaningless. Arrows drawn weeks ago no longer correspond to reality. Front lines have dissolved into fluid zones of contact, constantly pressured by American units that seem to appear everywhere at once. Around him, his men eat captured rations in near silence. The coffee is hot, the chocolate sweet, comforting in a way that feels almost obscene. Bauer pulls a notebook from his jacket and begins scribbling figures, not orders, but questions. How many divisions does it take to consume a depot like the one they destroyed? How many trucks to move it? How many ships to bring it across the Atlantic? He knows some of the answers. Before the war, he read about American industrial capacity with mild curiosity, even amusement. Now, those abstract statistics take on weight and shape. He thinks of German factories struggling under bombing raids, of skilled workers conscripted into the Volkssturm, of tanks rolling off production lines already obsolete, rushed into combat without proper testing. A lieutenant joins him, speaking quietly so the others won't hear. He asks Bauer if High Command understands what they are facing. Bauer considers the question carefully. He has heard the speeches, the promises of miracle weapons, and final offensives. He has also seen the fuel gauges dropping faster each day, the Luftwaffe absent from the skies. They understand pieces of it, Bauer says finally, but not the whole. The lieutenant nods grimly. In the distance, thunder rolls. Not weather, but artillery. American guns firing in quantities Bauer has learned to recognize by sound alone. Sustained, methodical. backed by ammunition trains that never seem to end. Bauer recalls an earlier campaign in Russia where capturing a Soviet supply dump felt like striking gold, a temporary reversal of fortune. This feels different. This feels like stealing a coin from a vault that remains full. As dawn approaches, Allied aircraft appear, silhouettes against the pale sky. 47. Thunderbolts circle, hunting. The column disperses under camouflage nets, discipline drilled by necessity. Bauer watches the fighters roar overhead and wonders how many spare engines, how many replacement airframes, how many pilots stand behind each one. When the radio crackles with new withdrawal orders, there is no argument, no protest, just compliance. The war has become arithmetic, and the numbers no longer favor Germany. Bauer folds his map, tucks away the notebook, and prepares to move again. But something fundamental has shifted. The depot was not just a tactical discovery, it was a glimpse behind the curtain. For the first time, Bauer doesn't think about how to win the next fight. He thinks about how long this can possibly continue and what it will cost everyone involved before it ends. As the column moves east under the cover of broken terrain and tree lines, Bauer rides half-exposed in his cupola, scanning for aircraft and roadblocks. At a brief halt near a bomb-cratered crossroads, officers from neighboring units gather, drawn by rumor as much as orders. Word of the captured depot has already spread. They speak in low voices, not out of fear of eavesdropping, but because saying these thoughts aloud feels dangerous. A major from a Panzer Grenadier regiment describes finding an American repair park days earlier. Rows of damaged vehicles calmly awaiting parts, mechanics working with a confidence born of certainty that replacements will arrive. Another officer mentions interrogating a captured US quartermaster who spoke casually of weekly tonnage figures that dwarf anything the Wehrmacht now moves in a month. Bauer listens more than he speaks. He notices a pattern. None of them are discussing tactics, flanking maneuvers, or counterattacks. They are talking about factories, ports, railheads, and shipping schedules. The war has shifted from the battlefield to the balance sheet. One officer laughs bitterly and says, "We fight like engineers with empty toolboxes." The laughter dies quickly. A courier arrives with news from higher headquarters. Another line to hold, another promise that reinforcements are coming. Bauer watches the faces around him. No one believes it anymore. Not because they lack faith, but because they have seen too much. As they mount up again, Bauer exchanges a glance with the Panzer Grenadier Major. There is an unspoken understanding. Even if Germany wins every local engagement from here on, the tide cannot be reversed. The Americans will rebuild what is lost faster than it can be destroyed. As the column resumes its retreat, Bauer reflects on how different this feels from earlier years. In 1941 and 1942, defeat always felt temporary, a matter of regrouping. Now it feels structural, built into the enemy's capacity to wage war. Every mile eastward confirms it. Roads clogged with refugees, units amalgamated on the fly, orders that contradict themselves within hours, and always, overhead, the steady presence of Allied air power, machines fueled by an economy that seems immune to exhaustion. Bauer realizes that what he witnessed at the depot was not an anomaly, it was the rule, and rules like that do not change. Late afternoon settles into a grey, oppressive heat as Bauer's unit reaches a temporary assembly area near Le Mans. The tanks are hidden beneath trees, engines off, crews sprawled in the shade. Bauer studies the road network on a captured American map, clean, updated, printed in quantities that suggest it was meant to be replaced often. He thinks again of the depot, but now his thoughts move beyond the soldiers he faces directly. The true enemy, he realizes, is not the infantryman or the Sherman tank, but the invisible system that feeds them. Somewhere behind the lines, American clerks tally inventory without fear of shortages. Factory managers schedule shifts knowing raw materials will arrive. Shipyards launch vessels faster than German bombers can sink them. Bauer recalls intelligence briefings from years earlier, dismissive assessments of American softness, their lack of will. He understands now how profoundly wrong that judgment was. Will, when backed by overwhelming capacity, becomes something else entirely: inevitability. A runner brings coffee brewed from captured supplies. Bauer accepts it and stares into the tin cup, watching steam curl upward. Nearby, a mechanic replaces a damaged road wheel using parts scavenged from wrecks, improvising as always. The contrast gnaws at him. German units survive by ingenuity and salvage. American units advance by replacement. As dusk falls, artillery fire resumes in the distance, closer now. Bauer hears the rhythm and recognizes preparation fire. Somewhere ahead, another German line will buckle. He wonders how many American supply depots stand ready behind that advance. How many more like the one they destroyed without truly diminishing the enemy's strength? For the first time since the war began, Bauer imagines its end not as a sudden collapse or dramatic final battle, but as a long, grinding acceptance of the unavoidable. He looks at his men, capable, disciplined, exhausted, and feels a surge of anger, not at them, but at the leaders who promised victory without understanding the scale of what they were fighting. The realization settles fully now. Germany is no longer fighting another army. It is fighting an industrial civilization at full mobilization. And no amount of courage inside a tank turret can change that. Night falls with little ceremony, the sky over Le Mans glowing faintly from distant fires. Bauer is summoned to a regimental briefing held in the cellar of a shattered farmhouse. Maps are spread across a wooden table, weighted down by empty shell casings. The regimental commander, a colonel with deep lines carved into his face, speaks plainly. No rhetoric, no promises. The orders are simple: delay the Americans as long as possible, then withdraw again. There is no talk of counteroffensives, no mention of turning points. Bauer notices the language has changed. Where once orders spoke of decisive action, they now speak of time gained. After the briefing, Bauer lingers as the others file out. The colonel lights a cigarette, offers one, and studies Bauer carefully. "You saw something back there, didn't you?" he asks, not accusing, just curious. Bauer hesitates, then nods. He describes the depot, not the tactical details, but the feeling of scale, of surplus beyond imagination. The colonel listens without interruption. When Bauer finishes, the colonel exhales smoke slowly. "I saw the same thing in Russia," he says, "but smaller, and even then, I knew." Outside, Bauer returns to his tank, the steel hull cool under his hands. His crew looks to him for guidance, for confidence. He gives it, because that is his duty. But inside, the illusion is gone. He understands now that every delay action, every defensive stand, is not about victory, but about postponement, about buying days or weeks in a war already decided by forces far from the front. As the engines start and the column prepares to move again, Bauer feels an unexpected calm. Clarity has replaced hope, and with it, a grim resolve. If the war cannot be won, it can at least be faced honestly. The tanks roll forward into the darkness, silhouettes against a sky owned by the enemy, and Bauer knows that the moment he stepped into that American depot was the moment the war truly ended for him, even if the fighting is far from over.